Most men believe the silence is a void, that abstinence is lack, that it is merely the absence of touch, of pleasure, of primal connection, but they are wrong. Abstinence is not emptiness, it is not loneliness, it is not denial. It is power, pulled back into the self, like a river that retreats to carve stone into canyon. Have you ever wondered why the monks in the mountains, the warriors in their solitude, and the prophets in the wilderness all chose isolation from flesh? Why they walked away from the thighs of pleasure and into the desert of self-restraint? It's because when the body grows still, when the dopamine storms quiet, when the craving ends, the soul begins to whisper, and most men have never heard it speak. Because the modern man is drowning in stimulation, he is dragged through the day by algorithms that arouse and flatter, then abandon. He's seduced by pixelated lust, by attention that simmers but never satisfies. He doesn't know what it means to hunger and hold the hunger. He doesn't know what it means to walk past temptation without needing to consume it. And so his mind is fragmented, his will diluted. But there is a different kind of man, a rare one, a man who chooses restraint not because he cannot indulge, but because he refuses to be mastered. He has walked through fire and come out ash. He has buried desire like a seed in winter and waited, not out of shame, not out of fear, but out of sacred warriorship. Because when a man lives without sex, without the constant reach for release, something ancient awakens inside him. The sexual energy, the very essence of life force, doesn't die. It transforms. It rises. It moves through the spinal corridors of his being, reshaping his posture, sharpening his gaze, turning lust into vision, and craving into conquest. It forges his soul in silence, and that silence becomes his sanctuary. You see, sex is the easiest doorway into the feminine, but when a man seals that door, the feminine doesn't vanish, it descends inward. His own inner feminine, the anima Jung spoke of, she begins to stir, and she is not soft, she is not sweet, she is the mirror of every illusion he's ever chased, and now he must face her. This is the path of abstinence most fear, the confrontation with the self. Because when there is no lover to project desire onto, no woman to worship or blame, he must finally see the one he abandoned long ago, the divine feminine within, the emotional child, the longing boy, the orphan dreamer, and he must father him. Abstinence strips away distraction. It exposes every shadow, the shame of not being enough, the rage at being unseen, the desperation to be chosen. It rises in waves, each one a test of the man's inner architecture. Will he collapse under his own unmet needs, or will he become the one who meets them? This is not the story they tell you in school, not the version sold by broken systems that profit from male weakness. They mock the virgin, the monk, the man who walks alone. They call him repressed. They call him involuntary. But they are terrified of him because he is a mirror they cannot control. He does not chase. He does not beg. He does not flinch in the face of silence, because silence is where he was reborn. The man who lives without sex is not starving. He is feasting on the marrow of discipline. He has tasted his own loneliness and not found it bitter. He has grieved his illusions and still chosen hope. He does not need your validation because he has finally validated himself. And you, listening now, you feel it, don't you? That stir in your chest, that ache to remember who you were before lust became addiction, before your worth was measured by conquest. Some part of you knows the man you're trying to become cannot be built on constant distraction. He must walk into the storm of abstinence. Not forever, but long enough to remember that pleasure is a tool, not a tether, and until he masters that, it masters him. He begins to feel it around the third or fourth week. The noise begins to fade. The mind, once laced with a constant thrum of fantasy and want, becomes unnervingly quiet. No longer haunted by images, cravings, impulses flaring like matches in the dark. That's when the real work begins, when the absence of stimulation becomes presence of awareness. This is the purification of the male spirit. You see, abstinence is not merely refraining. It is a slow, brutal, beautiful unmasking. The boy who once begged for attention must now sit in his own company. The man who once reached outward to prove his worth must now look inward and ask, who am I when no one is watching? When no one is touching me? When no one is choosing me? Most cannot bear this question. They run back into the arms of distraction, of casual validation, of synthetic pleasure, because looking directly into the abyss of self is terrifying. It means facing every wound that sex used to cover, every memory that climax used to bury. But for the man who stays, who endures, something miraculous occurs. He begins to see. He sees the subtle manipulations that once swayed him, the power plays hidden beneath flirtation, the hollowness behind most seductions, the games, the masks, the dances designed to fill voids but never build love, and suddenly he cannot go back. Not because he's bitter, but because he's awake. When a man stops chasing, he starts observing. He becomes dangerous in a different way, not with aggression, but with clarity, the kind of clarity that pierces through performance and pretense. He no longer needs a woman to complete him. He seeks not a mother, not a savior, but an equal. One who does not fear his solitude, but honors it. One who understands that his abstinence wasn't rejection of the feminine, it was a journey toward mastering his own. And this changes everything. In that stillness, the soul does not whisper, it roars. Old dreams resurface. Forgotten purpose reignites. Passions long buried beneath pleasure begin to flicker with life. It is as if abstinence reboots the nervous system, restoring the primal link between mission and manhood. Because when a man is not chasing sex, he is chasing greatness. He gets up earlier. He trains harder. He listens more intently. His time is no longer governed by lust, but by vision. He doesn't waste energy convincing women to stay. He invests energy building a life they want to walk into. But even that isn't the goal. The goal is self-possession. You, yes, you. If you're feeling lost, drained, misused by your own desires, maybe the medicine isn't more pleasure. Maybe it's silence. Maybe it's a season of abstinence, not to prove anything to anyone, but to meet the version of yourself who's been buried under years of chasing. Abstinence isn't celibacy for life. It's celibacy for clarity. And clarity rewires you. You start to feel like a man again, a man with weight in his words, a man who can walk away from what doesn't serve him, a man who isn't controlled by his biology, but guided by his principles. This is what the ancients knew. This is what the Stoics practiced. Seneca wrote that mastery over one's body was the first step to mastery over one's fate. And Marcus Aurelius reminded us, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength, but strength doesn't begin in the gym. It begins in the quiet. It begins in the refusal, in the sacred no, the no to indulgence, the no to unearned intimacy, the no to false closeness. And with each no, the man builds a deeper yes, yes to purpose, yes to legacy, yes to himself. There is no greater flex than discipline. You'll see it in his eyes. A man who's lived through abstinence does not waver. He isn't shaken by rejection, seduction, or silence. Because he has lived in silence, and in that silence he became something holy, not perfect, but unshakable. And this power cannot be bought. It cannot be faked. It must be earned through loneliness, longing, and the sacred art of restraint. Eventually, something inside him changes forever. It's not loud, not a revelation, not a lightning bolt. It's quieter than that, like standing at the edge of a vast, cold sea and realizing you no longer fear the waves. You've stopped flinching. The urges still come, but they no longer command. They whisper and you hear them, but you don't obey. That's power. That's sovereignty. Because you've walked through the storm of your own biology and didn't beg it to stop. You stood still while your mind screamed for distraction, and you gave it none. You let the hunger sharpen you. You let the ache carve out new space inside you, space not for lust, but for purpose. Abstinence is not about being against sex. It's about not being owned by it. Most men never realize how deeply they're possessed by the need to be wanted, how every move, every purchase, every goal has, at some level, been twisted by the question, will this make me more desirable? That question is a parasite, and abstinence kills it. It burns through the fantasy that your value lives in someone else's gaze. It cuts off the drip feed of external dopamine until you are forced to stand alone, raw, exposed, uncertain. That's when you meet the ghost of your boyhood. The version of you that wanted to be held, loved, chosen, and finally, you do what no one else could. You choose him, you hold him. You tell him that his worth was never in his desirability, but in his divinity. And when that boy becomes a man in your own arms, that's when the soul begins to build something new. A man with no need to chase is a man with every right to create. You don't chase sex anymore. You chase truth. You begin to see women differently, too. Not as puzzles to solve or trophies to win, but as sovereign beings, mirrors, teachers, flames. Some will test you, some will tempt you, some will honor you, but none will define you. Because the man who's lived without sex has discovered his essence, and no one can give it or take it away. Women feel this. They feel when a man no longer needs them to feel like a man. They feel the absence of grasping in your presence. They feel the depth in your eyes, forged not by charisma, but by crucible. And some are drawn to it, not because you pursued them, but because you didn't. You radiate something rare, integrity, a spiritual gravity. You become a lighthouse, unmoved, lit from within. And here's the paradox. Once you no longer crave sex as a source of identity, the feminine energy around you begins to shift. You draw in not just attention, but reverence. Because you have done what most men refuse to do, you've taken back your power. You've proven to your own psyche that your desire is sacred, not scattered, that your energy is not for everyone, that you are not starving. You are feasting on your own focus. And now, you walk differently. There's a calm in your bones, a slowness to your speech, a refusal to perform, a complete indifference to the games of the weak. You do not fear rejection. You do not fear solitude, because solitude raised you. You don't flex your abstinence. You don't need to. It's not a performance. It's a presence that says, I've known myself in the dark. I've disciplined my demons. I've stopped mistaking pleasure for purpose. Now, every decision you make is clean. Every word you speak is rooted. Every relationship you allow into your life is chosen, not clung to. You have tasted the power of delayed gratification, and you will never again bow to the tyranny of instant relief. This is what happens when the body goes silent. The soul, long silence, finally speaks, and you listen. That's when the deeper transformation begins. Once a man has silenced the noise of craving, he enters the realm of precision. No more wasted energy, no more scattering his life force on the fleeting and the forgettable. He learns to channel it like a monk with fire in his veins. His mind becomes sharper, his intuition louder. He starts hearing things other men miss. The subtext in conversation, the tension behind laughter, the quiet manipulations in a flirt. He becomes attuned to the emotional currents around him, not because he's trying to control them, but because he's no longer enslaved by his own impulses. Abstinence rewires the man. It gives him back dominion over his instincts. This is the psychological rebirth of the masculine, not as a brute force, not as a pleaser, but as a witness. He no longer reacts from old wounds. He responds from wholeness. He no longer clings. He observes. And when temptation does appear, as it always will, he sees it for what it is. Not evil, not shameful, but a test, a mirror. Are you in control of your energy, or are you still a slave to it? He doesn't have to ask. He knows, because abstinence is not just sexual, it's spiritual. It's the rejection of compulsive validation, the sacred pause between stimulus and response. And in that pause, a man becomes a creator. He begins to build, not just muscle or money, but a world of integrity, a code, a fortress of values forged in solitude. The man who once spent hours chasing approval now spends hours in devotion to his craft, his health, his mission. He stops begging the world to see him. He becomes the kind of man the world cannot ignore. This is the truth most modern men will never hear. They are taught to believe that if they go without sex, they will lose something, that they will dry up, fade away, become invisible. But the opposite is true. When you stop giving away your life force, it multiplies, and you start glowing with it. Not in some mystical sense, in the most visceral, grounded way. Your walk changes, your voice drops, your eye contact becomes still. You don't fill silences, you don't flinch when she tests you, you don't perform because you don't need her to like you. You like you. You've lived without anyone's body on your bed, without anyone's voice in your phone, without anyone's praise in your ears. And you did not collapse. You rose. You transcended. You became the man who does not chase approval because he already has his own. And this man, this rare, unshakable, sovereign man, is magnetic, not because he tries to be, but because he doesn't try at all. Women don't fall for him because he seduces. They fall because he's silent in the right moments, because he listens when others talk, because he says no when others plead yes, because he carries something sacred, and they feel it. But here's the secret. He doesn't care who feels it. He didn't do this for them. He did this for the man in the mirror, the man who was broken, the man who once begged, the man who almost forgot his name beneath years of people-pleasing and performance. He walked into the fire of abstinence and came out new. Not polished, not pretty, but pure. Now, his relationships are different. His desires are different. He no longer enters connections out of lack, but out of overflow. He gives without needing to receive. He loves without losing himself, because he's no longer afraid of being alone. He mastered being alone. And the world will never own a man who has found peace in his own solitude. Eventually, the world tries to tempt him again, not just with women, but with noise, distraction, performance. The old illusions dressed in new masks. The world whispers, "Come back, you've earned it, you've waited long enough, relax." Indulge. But something in him has changed too deeply to be fooled. Because abstinence didn't just test his will, it revealed his worth. He doesn't return to old pleasures because he doesn't need to anymore. The hunger that used to drive him is gone, not repressed, transcended, rewired. This is the final stage of the inner masculine's evolution, from boy to beggar, from beggar to seeker, from seeker to sovereign. He now sees abstinence not as a phase of denial, but as the gate through which a man walks into spiritual adulthood. He doesn't talk about it much. There's nothing flashy in self-restraint. No trophies handed out for inner peace. No applause for mastering your impulses. But when he enters a room, people feel it. There's something different about him. He doesn't fidget, doesn't scan the room for validation, doesn't flood his schedule just to avoid being with himself. His energy isn't scattered. It's still, grounded, whole. He can sit with silence like an old friend. And when he speaks, it's measured. When he loves, it's without addiction. When he walks away, it's without resentment. Because his value is no longer entangled in response. This is the soul's voice, finally heard. You are enough now. Without performance, without conquest, without applause. Some will call him cold, too distant, too selective. They will not understand. That's fine. He did not come here to be understood. He came here to remember who he is without the masks. He does not argue. He does not need to prove. He has already won the war no one sees, the war with himself, the war of longing, the war of self-doubt, the war of need. And when a man wins that war, he is free. He still desires, yes, but desire no longer enslaves him. He may love again. He may touch, taste, surrender, but never from emptiness, only from fullness. And in that, his love becomes a gift, not a plea, not a trade, a gift. He no longer uses women to soothe the wounds he hasn't faced, because he has faced them all, in the dark, in silence, in nights where he thought he might break, but didn't. He knows his triggers. He knows his trauma. He knows that abstinence wasn't about sex. It was about sovereignty, about remembering who he is when nothing is being offered. That man, who has stood on the edge of loneliness and didn't flinch, will never again settle for a cheap connection. He has learned to cherish his own energy like a sacred currency. And you, listening now, maybe you felt it too. That itch to distract, that impulse to escape, that pull toward someone's body just to quiet your mind. But what if you didn't reach? What if you stayed in the ache just long enough to meet the man beneath the craving? Would you find silence, or would you find yourself? Because that's what's waiting. Not deprivation, not loss, but revelation, a rebirth, a remembering. You will lose parts of you, yes. The needy boy, the restless addict, the people pleaser, the performer. Let them die so the man can rise. The one who doesn't perform, doesn't chase, doesn't bend to be seen, because he has already seen himself, and now he chooses. The man who knows his worth doesn't chase. He chooses.